DIYers, what's going on? Mike Boards with the Mike Boards channel. Thank you for watching. We are talking boats today, and in today's video we are working on a 1993 25 horsepower Mercury outboard. In today's video, the proper and safe way to replace both ignition coils. Let's get started. All right, DIYers, we are at the lake and it's pretty early. As you can see, no boats on the water. And we are going to again replace the ignition coils, and on the back of that boat is a 1993 25 horsepower Mercury outboard. Let's head there now. Coming to the back of the boat, there it is again, 1993 25 horsepower Mercury outboard. And we are going to swap the boat around and bring that outboard to the shallower portion of the water for the project. At this point, I've positioned the pontoon or float boat in a way where the outdrive is close to the shallow end and the dock. I'm going to do my best to give you good camera angles as we work through this project. I now have the camera positioned and we need to remove our cover. And in our case, again, 93, we've got this little latch down below, and we're going to carefully push down, and that is going to unlatch and unlock the entire cover to the outboard. And then I've got this little slot here for my hand. Carefully pull up and pull the cover completely off the engine. And at this point, with the cover removed, we have much better access to what we're going to be working on. And this is a water line. We've got two spark plugs going into our cylinders and our spark plug boots feeding off of our plugs and feeding into their respective ignition coils, which are on top. Now to a close-up of the actual ignition coils and the cover. You can see the cover held on by 3 bolts, and you see a number 1 on the right portion of the cover and a number 2, as well as a part number for the cover itself. And you've got additional wiring feeding into the positive and negative leads of the coils themselves. I've got the camera set back, and I want to talk about the plugs themselves. Here's what we are experiencing. When the engine is running idle or low RPM, honestly, it runs great. No issues, no misfires, no hiccups, no nothing. However, once we give it additional throttle and increase the engine to a high RPM, we begin to experience misfiring. And we've replaced the plugs, we've replaced the wires and boots, we've adjusted the carburetor, we've adjusted the throttle cable. However, unfortunately, we are still experiencing that misfire or hiccup or ever so slightly bogged down engine at high RPM. So I am going to remove both of the spark plug boots to the plugs themselves, and I'm going to remove the actual plugs, and I want to show you what we're seeing. Carefully grab the boot, not the wire, and remove it. And I am going to go down below, remove this as well, set that aside. In our case, we've got a 13/16 deep socket, and I will remove the lower plug first, and I am also going to carefully pull off our water hose, and I will shift that down below just to get that out of the way. And the plug should not be extremely tight, and in the event that you have ran your engine within the last 3 hours, do not touch the plugs. Allow the engine to cool off. And the bottom plug, as you can see, it is very clean. It is not wet. It's not burnt. It's not dirty. Pretty good condition. I'll set that aside. Now to the upper plug. And what a significant difference. It is wet. Look at that oil. It looks burnt. It looks terrible. And what that means to us is, even though it's a brand new plug within the last 2 weeks, the bottom cylinder is operating efficiently and as designed with the lower plug. It is firing. However, the top cylinder is not getting what it needs out of the plug because, again, it is completely wet, dirty, and awful looking. And unfortunately, this is not firing or igniting. And because of that, basically, we're running on one cylinder. So that tells us the next possible cause is routing all the way up to this ignition coil right here. However, in the event that you replace one ignition coil, do yourself a favor, replace them both at the same time. And up top, holding the spark plug boots on the respective coils, we have a zip tie, and I'm going to carefully, without damaging any wiring in the surrounding area, cut away those zip ties. Be very, very careful. Do not damage anything except the zip tie you're cutting away. And there's the first zip tie. Set that aside, and over to the second zip tie. Again, don't cut the boot, don't cut the wiring. Be very, very careful. There's the second zip tie. I'll set that aside. And again, now that the zip ties are removed, I can carefully pull off the spark plug boot. I'm going to slowly pull this down the line. And I am now going to grab a hold of this section of the wire and pull the connection right out of the coil. There it is. And we apply dielectric grease when we install these, both on the inner portion of the boot and the lead, so it should come out very easily. Now to the opposite side. Grab a hold of this section here and carefully pull out the wire. And I'm going to set that aside. From here you can see the ignition coils without the boots installed on them and the connections feeding inside the actual coils. And a few weeks ago when we were replacing our plugs and wires, as well as the boots that go onto the ignition coils, we noticed that this coil right here, the number 1 coil, had a slight discoloration on the inside portion. I was hoping this coil was still okay. However, we did notice it, and that brings us to this video. Coming to a close-up view, I do want to come inside the actual ignition coil and show you what I am referring to. You can see just a little bit of black discoloration inside that ignition coil. Possible overheating and burning. And coming to the left, or number 2 coil, very clean inside, as you see. So again, that ignition coil, in our opinion, is bad because it is not allowing the spark plug for the top cylinder to ignite and spark. And unfortunately, because of that, there is a massive buildup of oil inside the cylinder on top as opposed to the cylinder below. In other words, the spark plug on the bottom cylinder is igniting and sparking with no issues, burning off the fuel and oil inside the actual cylinder. However, the top cylinder is not. All of that oil is just gathering and building and unfortunately fouling the plug. And a quick reposition of the camera, I have grabbed my 1/4 inch Craftsman ratchet with the 9/32 deep socket here. I'm going to carefully remove the 3 bolts on top that secure the cover to the bottom mount and hold the ignition coils in place. And just go slow. Do not rush this, and do not drop your bolts inside the engine. You can get to a point where you can unscrew them by hand and pull them out, as you see here. After you remove those 3 bolts, you can carefully pull up on the cover and check that out. From here, we have much better access to the coils themselves. And again, we've got a black negative wire feeding into the negative terminal of each coil, and green and yellow wiring feeding into the positive. And in our case, these little nuts are 3/8 size. So we are going to carefully unscrew and do your absolute best not to drop those. They'd be tough to find down inside the engine, or if you drop them in the water, that would not be good. There's the first one. And you might actually want to loosen these before you remove the cover, because that is ultimately what's holding the ignition coils in place. And from here, I'm going to remove the black negative cable as well as the green and yellow, and I can remove the ignition coil. I'll set that aside, and I want to loop the wiring under that little port there. And again, 3/8 nuts, go ahead and remove them. And do your best to stay organized. I'm going to put the exact same bolts and nuts on the exact same terminals as well as inserts that they came out of. And I will set those aside and pull the ignition coil up and out. And again, for organization purposes, I've got the wiring that feed onto ignition number 1 looped under that little water port, and the wiring for the right side or number 2 ignition coil are right here. And now to a close-up view of where the ignition coils rest on the top brace of your engine. And we will grab a paper towel and clean as much of that debris off of there as we can. DIYers, at this point I have brought all of the parts away from the lake, and I am going to head back to the workbench and I am going to prepare the new ignition coils. I'll show you that here shortly, but again, stay organized. As you can see, the cover to the ignition coils, I have inserted the bolts in the respective holes they came out of and organized the nuts accordingly to again go back onto the exact same terminals they came off of. And there is the plug for the top cylinder. Again, that ignition coil is not allowing it to ignite and spark and work as designed. And because of that, we have a massive oil buildup inside that cylinder and on the electrode and thread of the plug itself. Not good. All right, DIYers, we're back at the workstation, and yes, Mom and Dad's jet ski in-house for DIY repair videos during the winter. It'll be rolling out here shortly. Let's head to the workbench. Making our way around the jet ski, and hey, if you're into skateboarding, down below in the comment section as well as the description section will be links on how to build your own custom logo skateboard and hang it on the wall. And we've got a lot going on, as I just said, jet ski repairs. And here are the ignition coils we just removed, and I'm going to reposition the camera and actually take them apart and see what's wrong with them. I've got the camera repositioned, and I'm going to set the ignition coil that was working properly aside and direct our attention to the ignition coil that was causing the issues. Again, it has that discoloration inside, and you've got your positive terminal, your negative terminal, and then you've got a little grounding clip. Then you've got a large rubber casing or protector boot, and I'm going to carefully pull that off. As you see here, the shape of it. And I will set that aside. And you've got these leads here. And our service manual states that you need to put RTV silicone inside those connections, and it doesn't seem like whoever did this last put them in there. I'm going to, ooh, look. There is a crack, and no crack on the bottom, but a crack on top. That is a big issue, and I'm going to peel this off. There it is. Okay, it's all starting to make sense, DIYers. Check that out. You can see it is broken. Look at that. And at low RPM, well, the engine's operating fine. However, once we increase that throttle to a high RPM, we are getting a misfire. And now we are very positive that it is this ignition coil, because not only the discoloration inside the lead, but this broken lead back here. And okay, wow. That is broke, and it is not supposed to be broke. And because it is broke, here's what's taking place at high RPMs. The switch box is feeding the electrical current to the ignition coils, both this one, and the ignition coil is then amplifying the current and output into the spark plug boots and downstream to the plugs themselves inside the cylinder, and creating that efficient spark. However, unfortunately, because ours is broken, well, it was touching because of this little tape here, and that's why that tape is there, as well as holding that grounding clip in place. However, at high RPMs, if you have not noticed in the past, I'll just share it with you. When your outboard engine is running, over time, the vibration and shaking basically crack this, and because it's cracked, even though that tape is holding it together, the ever so slight vibration in this location here with the electrical current is creating a short. And what does an electrical short cause? Well, it causes overheating, it causes a misfire, it causes an electrical current imbalance, all of which, DIYers, you don't want within your electrical system. I promise you that. And I'm going to take the rubber boot off the good operating coil. There we go. Set that aside. No cracks. Look at that. No cracks whatsoever. However, I don't think any silicone was added or RTV into this. So I'm going to put that back together, set it aside, and DIYers, this is our culprit. Yeah, there is absolutely no RTV silicone on these halves. That's what Mercury calls them. In addition, no silicone present inside the ignition housing here. Not good. And shortly, we will apply this RTV silicone sealant to our brand new ignition coils, which are in these boxes right here. and allow it to cure for 24 hours. And what that does again is alleviate vibration with these halves to again alleviate the halves from breaking, as shown here. Not good. At this point, I've set the old ignition coils aside, and in the box here are two brand new ignition coils. OEM, there's the part number, and again, the RTV sealant. Down below in the comment section as well as description section will be links on where to purchase these. Let's go and open our brand new coils. And the brand new ignition coils are unpackaged, and I also unpackaged the JB Weld high temp RTV silicone. And it came with 2 additional parts bags, and I opened up one of them and pulled out the piece of paper, basically a service bulletin or page straight out of the service manual for our exact serial number service manual outboard engine. And as you can see here, core change for through bolt mounted ignition coil, and in our case we do not have that through bolt, and this is what it is right here. As you just saw with taking apart the old ignition coil, I had 2 halves still installed, which are those pieces right there. However, if you do not have those halves installed, here's what you're going to do. You're going to remove the following parts from the ignition coil. Everything, the rubber boot, ground link, and both halves, as shown there. And you're going to apply a light coat of RTV sealer around the outer side diameter on the through hole core provided. Install the through hole core. Additional info in the event that that is your setup. However, our setup is as follows. We are going to apply the RTV sealer to our actual halves. And step number 1, remove rubber boot from ignition coil. We will do that. Step 2, remove core halves and apply a light coat of RTV sealer around the outside diameter of the core pegs, as shown here. And extremely important, let's read this. Do not get RTV sealer on these 4 mating surfaces. These surfaces have to make direct contact to provide full ignition coil output. Take a good look at those 4 points or mating surfaces to not get RTV sealer on. And then step 3, 4, and 5, reinstall the core halves into the coil. Tape the metal ground link to the core and reinstall the rubber boot. We'll show you how to do that now. Got the camera repositioned. I'm going to remove the parts bags that again have those cores in them. Set those aside, and I'm going to do 1 ignition coil at a time. As you see here, brand new ignition coil. And on the very bottom, you don't see a circle like you do here. So when it comes time to put this rubber boot back on, I'll put the circle portion on top. I'm going to carefully remove the rubber boot. And as you do this, just be careful. You do not want to break anything or bend anything. As shown here. And again, as I showed you a bit ago, there is a specific shape on how this goes back together. I'll set that aside. And the tape is slightly different on the new ignition coil. But again, there's the 2 halves. I am going to carefully peel the tape back. As shown here. Set that down. I'm going to remove the grounding clip and set that aside. And I'm going to peel the tape basically all the way back to this section right there. And I'm going to pull the top halve out, and there it is. Again, do not get silicone sealant here or on either side of the lower halve. Again, just on the outer portion of this core here. There's a sneak peek at the brand new ignition coil. High temp RTV sealant, and all I did was remove the cap, puncture it with this little point here, have a paper towel readily accessible, and do not get sloppy with this, DIYers. All I'm going to do is apply just a thin bead around the actual halve. And I'll do the same thing for the bottom half. Again, you can very quickly get sloppy with this. Do your absolute best not to. And from here, just double check that you did not get any on the leads here and the mating surface, that these two are going to come together like shown here inside the coil itself. And again, do not overdo it. You can get sloppy very quickly. I am now going to carefully insert the halve inside the bottom portion and rest it flat as shown here. Come in from the top as shown here. Mate the two surfaces, push them together. Again, double check that I don't have any silicone on that section right there, and push the two together. And I will resecure the grounding clip as shown here. Bring it over. Bring the tape on to secure the two halves together, as well as the grounding clip. And another double check, and that is exactly how I want it as shown there. From here back to the rubber boot, again with that little circle, I'm going to align it properly and slide it back in place. And again, the RTV sealant requires 24 hours to properly cure prior to starting the engine. Very important. Double check everything, and if all looks good, you can set this aside and we can start on preparing the second ignition coil. DIYers, we are making progress. Both ignition coils are properly prepped for reinstallment. And again, the old ignition coil set to the side, and they did not have RTV sealant, which increased the vibration inside the coils themselves, and well, that one failed prematurely, unfortunately. And again, we referenced our exact serial number service manual to ensure we are preparing our brand new ignition coils accordingly with that RTV sealant. And again, do not get that sealant on either four of those mating surfaces, just on the outer portion of those terminals there. And we continued on and finished up step 3, 4, and 5. Again, properly prepared, let's head back to the lake. However, before we head back to the lake, we need to grab our Loctite 271, not Loctite 518, not Loctite 243, not Loctite 680, but again, Loctite 271 for our exact serial number service manual. And you will see that shortly. All right, DIYers, we are back at the lake at the outboard engine. Again, 25 horsepower Mercury outboard, and I used some paper towel to clean up the surfaces up here and wipe away any oil, as well as clean the internal thread. And you do not want to wait all day because that silicone will cure. And I'm going to carefully put the ignition coils together as shown here with the grounding clips on top. Now to the cap or cover, you've got a unique hook design in the mold of the cover itself, as well as an extended mold to the housing itself on the ignition coil. And you want to get the cover in front of those slots on the housings of the coil. And that is going to help lock the coils in place as you push this down. And without dropping it, because right now it's not connected to anything, I am going to use, again, Loctite 271. And we are going to apply just a little bit of Loctite to the thread of each of the bolts that secure the cover. And this is very liquidy. Not a lot, just a little teeny bit, as shown there. And I will carefully align it in the hole all the way down, and align the bolt with the hole down below. Hand tighten it in. Do not cross thread these bolts inside the housings, DIYers. That would not be good. Now to the right bolt again, just a little bit. If your bolts are not going in smoothly and efficiently, back them out, reset the thread, carefully adjust the cover and ignition coils, and screw it in. Now to the center bolt, same thing, not a lot, just a little Loctite 271. And again, this is going to alleviate the bolts from vibrating loose when the engine is running. Now to a close-up top view of the ignition coil cover, secured on by those 3 bolts. Again, hand tight at this point, we will go grab the ratchet and socket and secure them. I've got the camera set back, and again, I'm using my 1/4-inch ratchet and socket. This is a 9/32 to secure these 3 bolts, and do them in sequence. And what I mean by that is tighten this about 5 times, 3, 4, 5. Come over to the right side, tighten that 5 times, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. To the middle, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And this is going to help properly seat the cover onto the ignition coils. Do not over tighten these DIYers. From here, I'm going to grab the 2 wires that fed underneath that water port. And again, green goes to the positive and black goes to the negative. Slide those on the respective terminals and secure it with the nut. And to the 3/8 socket. Again, do not over tighten these, but you want them snug. And bring these up, positive on first, negative on second. Thread on their respective nuts. Back to the socket. Again, do not over tighten these. And back to the plugs real quick. I will insert the bottom plug first. Do not cross thread these. They should go in extremely easy, as I mentioned before. And yes, DIYers, I am using a brand new plug to go inside the top cylinder, not that old, oiled, and nasty one. I have properly gapped this to 0.040. Do not cross thread it. And tighten them in place. Just like anything else, do not over tighten them. And those are on there. From here, back to the spark plug boots. And the small one again goes to the number 1 or right side ignition coil and the top cylinder spark plug. I'm going to press this in until it clicks, and you will hear it and feel it. Push it all the way in until it is flush with the rear inner portion of the coil. And from here, just slide the boot up and over the ignition coil. And from here, I'm going to push this portion onto the spark plug until it clicks and is secured and snapped in place, as you see there. From here, I might as well zip tie it in place. And as you secure the zip tie tight, make sure you're not damaging or crimping any electrical wires. And at the same time, push this rubber boot as far flush with the ignition coil as possible, all the way around. And once you feel that it is flush all the way around, bottom, either side, and on top, go ahead and tighten. As shown there. Now to the longer spark plug wire and boot, and same thing. I'm going to press it in the ignition coil until it clicks. And slide that boot all the way up and over, as shown here, all the way flush. Bottom boot onto the plug until it is on and clicked and locked in place. As shown there, I'll loop it inside that little hook. And same thing, I'm going to come in and secure this boot to the ignition coil without pinching any electrical wiring. That would not be good. Again, push this all the way flush as far as you possibly can to the ignition coil. As shown there. Next, before you snip these, go ahead and look the entire way around each of these spark plug boots that secure onto the ignition coil, and make sure you got a good grip of the boot itself all the way around and you're not pinching any wiring. If all looks good, go ahead and snip away the excess portion of your zip tie without cutting any wiring, as shown there. From here, I'm going to go down below and bring up this water hose and put it back on the fitting here. Very important hose. In the event that the engine is running and you do not have any water flowing through here and out your outboard in a streamlined manner, you are not properly cooling your engine, and that is going to lead to all sorts of issues which you don't want. And from here, just double check everything. Make sure you're not leaving anything loose or disconnected. Our ignition coils are secure. The cover is secured by the 3 bolts. Both positive and negative wires are secured on their respective leads or terminals on the ignition coils. The boots are secured, properly zip tied, the plugs are back in, and we've got a brand new plug up top and the water hose. From here, again, we got to wait 24 hours to allow that RTV sealant to properly cure. DIYers, do not start your engine in less than 24 hours from doing this project. You need to allow that silicone to cure. And all looks good. I am going to carefully rest the cap back onto the engine. And down below is our securing latch. Go ahead and secure that. Grab all your tools. All right, DIYers, at this point, the boat is turned back around and properly docked as it was before prior to the project. And again, we're waiting 24 hours. We'll see you then. All right, DIYers, we are back and docked, and as you saw, what a significant difference in engine performance. We're back up and running, and we hope this helps. Hey, do us a favor below the video. You'll see that thumbs up icon. Click on that, like the video, subscribe to the channel. Definitely ring your YouTube bell. That would be very helpful to us. We'd really appreciate it. Thanks again for watching. And definitely check out the link scrolling above. It takes you to our Fixing Boats and Jet Skis playlist.